Virus textbook assignment reading. Imagine that you have to solve a mystery. Farmers have begun to lose their tobacco crop to tobacco mosaic disease. First, the leaves turn yellow. Eventually, the leaves fall off, killing the plant. You use a light microscope to search for the pathogen or disease-causing agent, but it's too small, even for a microscope. Although you cannot see the pathogen, you are sure that it is there. In 1892, the Russian biologist Dmitry Ivanovsky studied tobacco mosaic disease. He showed that liquid taken from infected plants could cause the disease, but he could not find the pathogen itself. In 1897, the Dutch scientist Martinus Beijerinck suggested that tiny particles cause disease. He named these particles viruses after the Latin word for poison. Then in 1935, the American biochemist Wendell Stanley produced crystals of tobacco mosaic virus. Living organisms do not crystallize, so Stanley concluded that viruses are not truly alive. Most biologists still think this today. A virus is a non-living particle. It is made of proteins, nucleic acids, and sometimes lipids. Viruses can reproduce only by infecting living cells. And there's the tobacco mosaic virus, the influenza virus, and the bacteriophage. Viral structure and function. Viruses come in many shapes and sizes. The protein coat called a capsid surrounds the virus particles. Some viruses also have a membrane around the capsid. The simplest viruses have only a few genes. Complex viruses may have hundreds of genes. The structure of a virus allows it to infect living cells. Most viruses have protein on their surface. These proteins bind to proteins on the surface of the host cell. Viral proteins trick the host cell into taking in the virus or its genetic material. Viruses must bind exactly to proteins on the host cell's surface. Therefore, most viruses infect only specific kinds of cells. Plant viruses infect plant cells. Most animal viruses infect only certain kinds of animals. Viruses that infect bacteria are called bacteriophages. They infect only certain kinds of bacteria. Viral infections. What happens after a virus enters a host cell? The virus uses its genetic information to make copies of itself. Some viruses copy themselves immediately. This type of infection is called a lytic infection. Other viruses stay inactive for a period of time within the host cell. This type of infection is called a lysogenic infection. Lytic infection. In the lytic infection, a virus enters a cell, makes copies of itself, and then causes the cell to burst. For example, bacteriophage injects its DNA into the bacterial cell. Then the bacterial cell makes messenger RNA from the viral genes. This mRNA is translated into viral proteins that chop up the cell's DNA. The host cell makes new virus particles. Before long, the cell bursts open and copies of the bacteriophage are released to infect other cells. Lysogenic infection. In a lysogenic infection, the host cell is not taken over right away. Instead, the virus inserts its nucleic acids into the cell host DNA. The viral DNA is copied along with the cell's DNA. The cell is not damaged. Daughter cells are infected by the virus. Bacteriophage DNA then becomes a part of the bacterial host DNA. It's called a prophage. A prophage may be a part of the host cell's DNA for many generations. Changes in the environment, such as heat or chemicals, can cause the prophage to become active. Then the lysogenic infection becomes a lytic infection, and the cell bursts open and releases it, and that is when you get sick from the lysogenic infection. And here is a diagram showing the lytic infection. In the lysogenic infection, that goes through the prophage stage and it's copied, making generations, and then it is activated to go into the lytic infection. Okay. A closer look at the two. RNA viruses. About 70% of viruses have RNA rather than DNA. In humans, RNA viruses cause a wide range of infections from mild colds to AIDS. The common cold. What happens when you get a cold? A capsid lands on a cell, often in your nose, and is brought inside a host cell. Inside the host cell, a viral protein makes new copies of the viral RNA. The host cell's ribosomes mistake the viral RNA for the host's own mRNA. The viral RNA is translated into capsids and other viral proteins. The new virus particles form within. Within 8 hours, the host cell bursts. Hundreds of new virus particles then infect other cells. HIV. The disease called Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, AIDS, is caused by the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV. HIV belongs to a group of RNA viruses called retroviruses. The genetic information of the retrovirus is copied from RNA to DNA instead of from DNA to RNA. Retroviral infections are similar to lysogenic infections. When a retrovirus infects a cell, it makes a DNA copy of its RNA. The DNA copy is inserted into the DNA of the host cell. Like a prophage, the viral DNA may remain inactive for many cell cycles. Eventually, it makes new virus particles. These new particles attack the cells of the host's immune system, the system that normally fights infections. And there are a list of viruses and then cells, their characteristics. Notice DNA or RNA for the virus. And it can only reproduce within a host cell. It's going to have either DNA or RNA. It cannot grow and develop. It cannot obtain and use energy. Response to the environment says no, but it does adapt, change over time. Okay. Cells have a cell membrane, cytoplasm. Eukaryotes also have other organelles, independent cell division, either sexually or asexually. Cells have DNA. Cells may be multicellular. Cells increase and differentiate over time. They obtain energy, respond to the environment, and change over time. So viruses and cells. To grow and reproduce, viruses must infect living cells. Viruses rely on the nutrients and cellular machinery of their host. Therefore, viruses are parasites. Parasites rely on a host, harming it in the process. Viruses are not alive, but they do have several characteristics of living things. After infecting living cells, viruses can reproduce. They have genetic material. They can evolve. Although viruses are smaller and simpler than the smallest cell, it is unlikely that they appeared before living things, because they depend on living organisms. Viruses probably developed after living things. Perhaps the first viruses evolved from the genetic material of living cells. Viruses and the cells that they infect have been evolving for billions of years. Prokaryotes, those are simple bacteria cells. So classifying prokaryotes, when the microscope was first invented, we humans discovered something amazing. We share every corner of our world with microorganisms. The smallest and most abundant of these microorganisms is prokaryotes. Prokaryotes are single-celled organisms that lack a nucleus. The DNA of prokaryotes is found in their cytoplasm. Biologists classify prokaryotes as either bacteria or archaea. Okay. So how are prokaryotes classified? They're classified either as bacteria or archaea. And again, those are the two domains that we talked about. Bacteria live almost everywhere, in fresh water, in salt water, and on land. They even live inside the bodies of humans and other eukaryotes. The art below shows the structure of a bacterium that lives in the human intestines. Most bacteria are surrounded by a cell wall that contains peptidoglycan. This molecule is made up of sugars and amino acids. Some bacteria are also protected by a membrane outside the cell wall. Bacteria may use flagella or pilius for movement. Pili also help them attach to the surface of other bacteria. And here's the picture. You'll need to be able to draw this. And you have a flagella for moving. This shows that the genetic material is just floating around in the cytoplasm. Sometimes it's called a nucleoid region. It's just there's no nucleus inside a prokaryote. Pro means no. And it has the outer membrane, peptidoglycan cell wall. And ribosomes, it does have ribosomes because it has to be able to make proteins. And there's the DNA. Pili that help it move and attach to others. And the flagella that also helps it move.